Number 5. Strange things in the skies. Now, I know I talked about this in a previous video, and if you're a really good top 5 scary fan, maybe you'll recognize some of these. But since I aired that last video, way more weird stuff has happened, so it only seems fitting that we'd run through it once again. Starting on February 10th, yours truly's birthday by the way, there was a pattern of incredibly bizarre happenings in the skies, and some very dodgy answers from government officials who refused to confirm or deny anything, which always seems more suspicious than less. So here's a quick Cole's Notes play-by-play of the last few weeks. On February 10th, US fighter jets brought down a still unidentified object over the coast of Alaska. This object has not been confirmed what it is at all or identified, but it's been confirmed as not being a balloon. Okay, that's one thing, only 1 million left to go. One official referred to it as being the size of a small car, which is definitely beyond strange. You think you would see that flying around? This single event would probably be enough to set tinfoil hats on fire and keep me in business for the next few years making videos about conspiracies, but the literal next day on February 11th, a UFO was shot down over Canada, around the Yukon. That's the big territory up on the left, right by Alaska. A US fighter jet downed this one, and it was described as being smaller than the first and cylindrical in nature, which is gonna come up a few times before this video is done, so hold on to that thought, there's still more. February 12th, we had something bizarre shot down over Lake Huron. An object that first appeared over Montana reappeared on Sunday before being shot down with an octagonal structure and strings hanging off of it, but it wasn't carrying anything, which is bizarre. And then over Billings, Montana, there was something very bizarre that was seen falling from the sky, leaving a thick orange chemtrail, and residents were left in the dark about it. Local residents wondered just what it was, and some Redditors in a group noticed around the area that there had been an increased military presence since the sighting. So just what is going on around here, there, and just about everywhere? But if you can't wait at all, and you just want to watch alien videos all day, I agree with you. That's what I do every single day, and it's a great way to live. We've got loads of alien and UFO vids, NASA conspiracies, all the things they don't want you to know. And if that ain't your jam, we got scary stories, horror movies, monsters, cryptids, true crime, just about everything spooky under the sun and above it. So stay subscribed to Top 5 Scary, but most importantly, stay scared. And keep watching this video, because I got way more weird stuff coming up for you. Number 4, the Tom DeLonge sighting. If you're a UFO enthusiast, then you know that one of the leading names in UFO research and discovery right now is Tom DeLonge, the nasally voiced frontman for pop punk project Blink-182. And if you didn't know that, now you do. Although I suspect most of the people who watch our videos don't know that band. Anyway, little trivia for you. That's what he does when he's not selling out $300 concerts. He hunts aliens, and he's pretty good at it. If some of the footage he gathers is anything to go by, why don't you take a look at this weird footage he shared on his Instagram a couple days ago. It's gonna go right there. Pretty darn weird, huh? If that isn't one of the most clear, close encounters I've ever seen, I'm not sure what is. You can practically trace the outline of the flying saucer. It looks like the platonic flying saucer, like the one we all imagine when we close our eyes. I can almost see the little green man inside. On his Instagram, DeLonge wrote this caption: "Enjoy. They are real." To the Stars Media will be turning real events like these into major feature films and television series to bring the facts to the world. Note the whirling sound from the propulsion. Now, To the Stars is the fringe research company owned by Tom DeLonge, hoping to spread information and explore the possibility of UFOs and UAPs, and it does also sound like it's a plan to get Tom DeLonge some more money by making a cinematic alien universe. Whatever his endgame is though, can't deny the footage posted here is eerily compelling.
In third place, we have an Air Force landing cover-up. Quinn Nelson, who wants his location to stay private out of fear for his safety, knew a girl whose dad was stationed at an Air Force base in his state. At the time, there were 2 Air Force bases and 1 Marine Air Station in that state, so he feels comfortable making this story known. Quinn said he went to see the girl and stay with her family over a weekend, arriving on the Friday, just in time for family dinner. He and the girl decided to walk over to the base movie theater afterwards to enjoy some private time. And after the movie was done, they were walking back to the family's quarters in the company of many Air Force kids and families who also saw the movie. He said that as they were walking, Air Force Air Police personnel began driving down the base housing streets, ordering the theater goers to the nearest base housing residence. A siren or tone was wailing from somewhere, along with a code being repeated that Quinn refuses to name. The crowd didn't put up any kind of resistance and began moving when they were directed, as if this was a normal occurrence. Something Quinn observed as being weird to him, but hey, He wasn't going to be the only one to put up a fuss. When the group he was walking with arrived at a house, his girlfriend, without knocking, pushed the door open and they all walked in. Quinn said the members of the household were pulling the window drapes closed, sending out folding chairs, offering water, acting like this was a planned gathering instead of some random occurrence. Around an hour or so later, the air police again went up and down the streets, giving the all clear, and somewhere the same siren or tone was sounding. Later that night, his girlfriend's family told him that he must never tell anyone about what had happened on the base, saying that this is what happens when UFOs would land on base property or nearby, something that was apparently very common on Air Force bases. Anyone want to let me know in the comments section if that's true? Consider me intrigued. In second place, we have lizard beings from Colorado. Back in 1968, Hannah and her family were living in a small town around the west end of Montrose County called Uruvan, Colorado. One early summer morning, she was awoken by the barking of the family dog named Tippy outside of her bedroom window, which was unusual for the pup, who usually only barked when someone or something was in a yard that they weren't supposed to be. Hannah remembers waking out of a deep sleep and hearing Tippy constantly barking and wondering why her older brother, who slept in the bunk above her, and her parents, who slept on the other side of the wall, weren't telling Tippy to quit it. Finally, Hannah was fed up and decided to turn over in bed and look out the window, and was met with a sight she didn't believe at first. There was a small circular ship with its landing gear down and hatch with stairs folded down to the ground. Next to the ship were green lizard-like beings with bright yellow eyes, webbed hands that resembled a bow and arrow, and some had tanks on their backs. They had thin bodies, were covered in scales, and had V-shaped toes. According to Hannah, the overall mood was that these beings were searching for something, but she had no idea as to what. Another alien exited the ship, but it was much larger in size than the others, and seemed to be the one giving out orders. This caused Tippy to begin barking aggressively once again, upsetting the aliens who began to approach the dog. Hannah instinctively jumped off her bed and rushed into her parents' room in an attempt to wake her mom, but struggled. Her mom slept as if she was completely out of it, and when she finally awoke, was incredibly sluggish in movement. Hannah explained what was going on outdoors and her concern for Tippy, but the mom was unable to see the creatures, wanting only to go back to sleep. Speaking from experience, my dad would have been the same way if I tried to wake him up. Trust me. Hannah's mom eventually told her to sleep away from the window, and before she fell back to sleep, she remembered seeing two of the lizard beings looking in her room through the window, and no longer hearing any noise from Tippy. When morning came, Hannah rushed outdoors in her PJs to check on the beloved pet, and Tippy was waiting around like nothing had happened. The occurrence was never discussed between Hannah and her mom again until shortly before her mom's passing in 2016, when she asked Hannah if she remembered seeing the lizard people and their ship back in the yard in Colorado. Creepy. In first place, we have the Voronezhsky abduction. I tried. I promise I tried. 34-year-old Vladimir and his 29-year-old wife Olga were at home with their 1.5-year-old son Arthur and their daughters Vanessa and Angelica. Olga had asked their daughters to run an errand, and while returning home, both girls saw an unusual object in the sky, so they rushed home and told their family that they had seen a flying star. Olga told them that it had most likely been a satellite or a plane, but the girls objected and explained that the object had been round, with strange white, yellow, and red flashing lights around its perimeter. Both girls then drew a picture of what they had seen, and despite the fact that they went to different rooms to sketch, both drawings were very similar. The girls then insisted that their parents go outside to look at the sky. Olga and Vladimir saw a distant hovering object in the sky that seemed to move and change shapes. Olga managed to take a photo of the object with her cell phone, but the photo only showed a yellow spot or elongated strip with a black background. The family went back inside, had supper, and went to bed. And while I would love to end this here, y'all know better about how this is about to go. Around 2 a.m., Vladimir suddenly awoke and saw that the whole room was lit by a whitish violet light and tried to wake Olga, who refused to wake up, so he went back to sleep. And seeing as it was 2 in the morning, I would have done the same. The bright lights woke up their youngest daughter, Angelica, who ran to wake her mother. Olga then woke up, saw what the other two had seen, and woke Vladimir back up. He was amazed to see that the ceiling of the room had apparently disappeared or had become totally transparent. Right over them, instead of the ceiling, they could see the open sky and a huge disc-shaped craft hovering right above. Vladimir and Olga ran outside their home, still in their PJs, and could see a hovering disc-shaped UFO emitting the strong lights around 100 feet away. Olga began floating, zooming upwards in a spiral motion, and when Vladimir tried grabbing her legs, he discovered he couldn't control his body. Olga described feeling nauseous, unable to control her body as well. In a state of shock, the couple found themselves teleported inside a room with transparent walls and no furniture. Moments later, the duo witnessed 12 entities enter. The humanoids were short, around 4 feet tall. They had 3 fingers on each hand and large heads with smooth gray skin. Vladimir didn't notice any mouths, noses, or ears on them, but noticed their large, black, pupilless eyes. The entities had no visible legs and were moving around like caterpillars. They wore a completely sealed, tight-fitting coverall with masks and hoods that covered their bodies. Only one of the aliens was taller from the rest, easily over 6 feet tall, and stood behind the other small humanoids, with his face not being visible under his outfit. The short entities approached Olga first, placing her in a deep armchair that resembled a gynecologist's chair, prompting Vladimir, who was now unfrozen, to attempt to rush towards her when he ran into an invisible wall or force field. 2 of the aliens approached him, and he asked what was going on, and they reassured him telepathically that you will soon be back home. Vladimir rightfully became angry and attempted to push the aliens away, but was thwarted by more entities grabbing him in an attempt to restrain him. The aliens asked him why he resisted, staring straight into his eyes each time they communicated telepathically, before inserting 4 metal rods into his chest area, paralyzing him completely. So from that moment on, he was unable to move and could only stand there helplessly and watch the aliens experiment on Olga. Somehow, they were able to cut into her stomach without her noticing or using any kind of known surgical instruments. She sensed the smell of her inner organs, feeling unpleasant but no pain, only tranquility and relaxation. Modern human medicine could apparently stand to learn a thing or two. The aliens seemed to be taking samples from her body and organs, and apparently were now using different instruments to study the organs inside her abdomen. Olga was only able to describe one that looked like a pair of pincers and had 3 clamps. After the strange procedures, the aliens closed and sewed up her stomach. Now, before the abduction, Olga had been bothered by stomach pains, and after the abduction, she never suffered from them ever again. The smaller humanoids respectfully called the taller humanoid by a word that Vladimir has loosely translated as the professor, who explained to Vladimir that their society was like a huge ant colony. After Vladimir was brought in front of the professor, he asked the entity why they had taken him and his wife, with the taller being answering that it had to be done. Both witnesses understood that having such feelings was the central interest of the aliens. The tall alien said, "We do not understand you. Why haven't you, intelligent animals, destroyed yourselves yet? How can you survive with your emotions?" He said that there was a space war going on at this time in the universe, and that the entity that you call God has implanted much information to Earth and into the waters of it. Those who are against God want that information destroyed. If the Earth is going to be destroyed, the Son of God would arrive to Earth again and will restore everything living in it. Through the transparent surface of the cabin, the duo could see planet Earth approaching and felt that their spacecraft was slowing down. The couple was then returned back to Earth the very same way they were abducted. First in the smaller module, and then this large disc-shaped craft, and then through the roof of their home inside a beam of light. At 11 a.m. the next morning, Vladimir and his wife Olga awoke, and a while passed before they talked about what had occurred. But after analyzing the mutual identical memories, they understood what had happened had not been a dream, but reality. The whole family underwent extensive medical tests to see if the aliens had left behind any implants to try to find some traces of surgery. By some mysterious manner, Vladimir lost his gray hairs, and his physical powers of endurance increased after the abduction. Olga was cured of her chronic colitis and gained the ability to make a drunken man sober by placing the palm of her head on a man's forehead for 2 to 3 minutes.
I'm just gonna call this first sighting or series of sightings February 2023. February was quite a month for unidentified flying objects, and I wanted to start this list off with these sightings because of how recent they are. They may not be as definitive or weird as some of the other sightings on this list, but these were pretty high-profile stories, and it's always far more interesting when the government is involved in these things. Just adds another layer of credibility to it. Not that the government doesn't lie or withhold information about things, I think we all know that that happens, but the fact that it's being reported on so heavily means it's pretty big news. So the story here is that several mysterious high-altitude objects were shot down in February of 2023 over various airspaces. We had objects being spotted in Canada, United States, Latin America, China, Eastern Europe. It started when several unidentified objects were shot down over Alaska, the Yukon, and Lake Huron. The general of NORAD, Glenn D. Van Herk, made a statement saying the objects could be benign, but it wasn't 100% sure. When asked if they could be of alien origin, though, that's the question we're all digging to ask, he said, he just wasn't ruling anything out. I'm just interested by this. It really seems like the government and military agencies are starting to become more open to the idea of extraterrestrial life, or maybe some of them already are fully aware of their presence. Either way though, it seems like it's being discussed more. It's not being written off as nonsense like it has been in the past. So just that aspect alone is interesting to me. Now, here's another interesting thing about these cases. There were recovery attempts made, to find these objects that had plummeted towards the Earth. Unfortunately, they all landed in areas that aren't all that accessible, so it made for a pretty difficult recovery process, and the missions were pretty soon abandoned. Now, that's what they say, but what if the government actually did recover something that they just aren't ready or even willing to show us? Could be the case. You never know. Next up, we have the Oumuamua. Oumuamua, that's a hard word to say. I'm gonna try not to say it too many times on here. Old news with this one, right? It's that weird cylindrical object that was spotted flying through space. It's definitely been talked about plenty of times, including on this channel, I'm sure, but it's a recent article dated March 7th of this year that I'm referring to here. So, like I said before, I think when the government, military, or academics get involved with UFO type stories, it just makes it far more interesting to me. Not that I'd totally disregard some farmer in Ohio saying he was probed by a little gray, bug-eyed alien, but I don't know. People like attention sometimes. In a recent article written by Sean Kirkpatrick, head of the Pentagon's AARO, or All Domain Anomaly Resolution Office, which specializes in unidentified flying objects, and a Harvard professor named Avi Loeb, they discussed the possibility that objects such as Oumuamua, spotted back in 2017, could be of alien origin. So pretty exciting. I mean, these are two learned, intelligent people writing an official document theorizing the possibility of alien life. I mean, that's just cool. The article does say, however, that the objects, like the Oumuamua, could be, quote, a parent craft that releases many small probes during its close passage to Earth. So probes observing Earth could be good or bad or neutral, depending on whether you're a glass half empty or half full type person. Now, they didn't just discuss that object, they were looking at a variety of unidentified objects or probes, and they wanted to speculate that these crafts could potentially power their batteries from starlight, and that maybe Earth's water could be fuel. It's pretty wild stuff, and yes, a lot of it is speculative, but the fact that a highly respected scientist that spent 20 years studying physics is proposing these ideas, pretty fascinating. Something I also want to mention about people who are just very skeptical about aliens even showing any interest at all in Earth. You'll hear them say stuff like, well, extraterrestrial beings with all this advanced technology, they just wouldn't be interested in anything we're doing. It'd be like, God observing ants or something. And who's to say, first of all, that God doesn't like observing ants? And, even if that is the case, I mean, like, how can you really know that for sure? How on earth could we possibly know what beings from another planet are interested in? We don't know what kind of hobbies they have. It's also kind of counters their other argument, because it's like, yeah, spacefaring extraterrestrials would be leagues ahead of us in terms of intelligence, but I know what they're thinking. I know what they like. Just doesn't make any sense.
Number 3, Linda Napolitano. Linda Napolitano, also known as Linda Cortile in some circles, is a woman who claims that she was abducted by aliens in New York City in 1989. Her story has become one of the most famous but also controversial alleged alien abduction stories. According to the way she tells it, Napolitano was asleep in her 12th floor apartment in Manhattan when she was suddenly awoken by a bright light. She claimed to have seen 3 small beings with large black eyes and pale skin who levitated her out of her bedroom window into a waiting nearby UFO. Napolitano described the beings as being humanoid and about 4 feet tall. That's a great size for an alien to be. Napolitano reported that she was taken to a room on the craft where she was examined by the beings. She said that she was then taken to a council room where she saw several human-like beings who were apparently in charge of the operation, and they all looked like Rick from Rick and Morty. Napolitano claimed that the beings communicated with her telepathically and told her that they were from the planet Serpo and were conducting experiments on humans to better understand our physiology. Okay then, well, completely reasonable, no cause for any alarm, I understand. Take as many humans as you need, take as much tissue as you need, understand our physiology, you love learning, nothing wrong with that. Napolitano's alleged abduction gained widespread attention, with her story being featured in major news outlets and a book detailing her story as well. Now, years after the fact, Napolitano has maintained to anyone who'll listen that what happened to her was the good and honest truth, and has since become a fairly notable figure in the UFO and alien communities for sharing her unconventional story. What could that council be? I think there's a good chance that could be the Council of Ricks. Number 2, the Allagash abduction. Our next tale of alien abductions coming up for you is the Allagash abduction, named after the Allagash waterway in Maine where it took place. In 1976, a group of 4 friends who'd all met in college were taking a camping trip, canoeing and relaxing, good times on a good weekend. Their trip would be a trip they'd never forget, not just because the salmon were jumping that week. The men, twin brothers Jack and Jim, and friends Chuck and Charlie all decided to go out fishing on the lake at night. Before setting off though, they lit a large campfire to act as a landmark from the water so they knew how to get back. The evening transpired normally, fishing, sharing stories, until the men saw a blinding light in the sky. A glowing orb that shone brighter than any light any of them had ever seen before, flashing all sorts of bright, radiant colors. This object was hard to make out, but looked to be 80 meters in diameter and was slowly approaching the fishing boat. The light was described as blinding. The men hurriedly panicked and paddled back to the shoreline to discover that their campfire had been completely smoldered and looked to have been out for hours and hours, despite the men having not been out nearly that long. The men then started reporting having nightmares, all very similar, seeing a silver operating room and long, tall, giant-headed creatures examining them in this room, taking blood samples, skin samples, and so on. They all reported extremely similar nightmares and described the aliens and the room the same way. The men underwent psychiatric evaluation and were all deemed mentally stable, even passing lie detector tests. So what happened? Were they just really bored out on the water and they cooked up a story worthy of Hollywood? Was this a mass hallucination? Or were these unlucky men plucked by visitors from another world for study? We may never know, but I'm interested to hear what you think, so let me know down below, okay? And number 1, David Huggins. David Huggins. Where do I begin? Our last story is that of David Huggins. I personally think I saved the best for last. At least I think so. Let's see if you agree as well. David Huggins is an artist who claims that he's been abducted by aliens not just once, but multiple times throughout his life. His first account happened when he was very young, reporting that he saw a UFO hovering over a nearby field, and a humanoid figure appeared down from the craft, blessing Huggins by telling him telepathically that he had a special mission to fulfill in life. If only he had any idea what that meant. Just a special mission, that's very vague. He would get closer to the truth on that because over the years, Huggins claimed that he had several encounters with these same alien humanoids, who he describes as being tall and thin with large heads and eyes. He says that these beings have taken him aboard their craft and shown him a number of things, including the creation of the universe and the future of the human race. Now here's where things get a bit interesting. Huggins claims that as part of fulfilling his galactic destiny, that he's fathered several human alien hybrids with the extraterrestrials. Okay. Inspired by these momentous events, Huggins painted his truth, rather directly influencing his artistic career with several of his paintings and his works depicting humanoid beings and UFOs and sometimes showcasing what happens when an alien and a person love each other very much. His paintings are actually visible in the Visionary Art Museum in Baltimore if you want to go check them out sometime. I will say they're pretty fun paintings. I would love to have one in my living room. Just a fair warning though, before you go Googling, they are definitely not safe for work unless your work is my work, at which case looking at pictures of aliens kissing is my job, but also my passion. Do what you love, and you never work a day in your life. And brother, I have never worked a day in my life.
Number 5, hypnotic regression. Many people who claim to have been abducted by aliens are unable to remember a lot of the specific details of their abductions. Because of this and the public stigma against people with alien experiences, many people choose to never come forward, or their stories are written off as delusion. But in the spirit of giving people the benefit of the doubt, let's talk about a certain woman's experience with hypnotic regression. A woman who claims she was abducted by aliens was put under hypnosis in order to give a documentary crew information about the visitors from other worlds. When asked how aliens are able to travel at such incredible speeds, she responded with the following: "I can't explain it, but it's like if they want to get from one point to another point, they remove what's in between, so they don't have to travel that distance. They are instantly from there to there." When asked why aliens are studying humans, the response was, "They are very wary of humankind. Mankind is progressing technology-wise, and soon he's going to come across technology that will allow him to peel back the layers of dimensions. And they want to know all about man for their own benefit. Man's warlike, aggressive, an animal. He's in possession of technology that is more than he is. There's no balance. And they're very wary that he's now on the threshold of many breakthroughs, one of which is peeling back dimensions. It's like an onion skin. You peel back one layer, and there's another one underneath, and another one underneath, and another one underneath. The same with dimensions. They're scared. Do aliens really study humanity out of a fear of what we will do once we discover interdimensional travel? And if so, how do they feel about all the UFOs we have apparently shot down? What do species historically do with groups that they are afraid of? What fate awaits the human race at the hands of these interplanetary visitors? Number 4. Sam the Sandown Clown. Our next story comes from the January-February edition of the British UFO Research Association Journal and concerns an anonymous man going by the alias of Mr. Y, who claims that one October night in the year 1970, he was driving to visit a friend when he saw something hovering over the swamp to his right. It was a huge UFO with several different multicolored orb-like lights brightly illuminating the craft. He got out of his vehicle to observe the craft for a moment and then continued on his way. He looked out his window and realized that the craft was now following him, its lights spinning. Mr. Y got to his friend's house, and the friend was amazed at the guests that had followed him there, before disappearing into a nearby tree line. For years, Mr. Y would see the red orbs following him from time to time, watching him and stalking him. Doubting that anyone would believe him, he kept these encounters to himself until 1973, when his 7-year-old daughter Faye and her friend were playing near Lake Common Road when they heard an eerie wailing sound. They followed the sound to a nearby meadow, and the wailing stopped. They walked over a small bridge when suddenly a blue-gloved hand with 3 fingers appeared from under the bridge. They looked in the small river and saw a strange figure standing in the middle holding a book. He was described as being 7 feet tall and without a neck. He was wearing an odd and tattered costume consisting of a green tunic with a red collar, white pants, and a pointed hat with a black ball on top and 2 antennae. He had a pale white face, lips that never moved, red hair, and triangle holes for eyes. The children watched in shock as the figure hobbled over to a strange metal hut. Not long after, they saw the figure again as he wailed, and then spoke into a microphone asking if they were still there. He then communicated by writing in his book, saying that his name was Sam. They asked if he was a man, and he said no. They asked if he was a ghost, and he said, "Well, not really. But, in a way, I am." He said that there were others like him, and that he was afraid of being attacked by humans. He invited them into his metal hut, which was filled with wooden furniture and elaborate knobs. The children hung out with Sam for an hour before leaving, and a year later, she told her father about the encounter, telling him that there had been men nearby fixing a post who had acted as though they could not see the strange creature. He had trouble believing her, but he had had enough experiences with aliens of his own that he had to consider the possibility that it was real. Did Mr. Y's daughter really see a strange alien in the woods, or is this just the overactive imagination of a child? In an age where spacecraft are being seen all over the world at an alarming rate, we really can't rule anything out. And what of the UFO stalking Mr. Y? What were they hoping to see? And why was he selected to be the subject of their curiosity? This mystery will likely never be fully unraveled.
Alrighty, in our third place position, we have the Guy Hotel Memo. It's the most requested document in the FBI's archives, right after the photo of Elvis and Nixon riding with an alien. The file has been checked out roughly 1 million times in the last 2 years alone. So far as KG cover-ups go, this one's fairly out in the open. But that doesn't make it any less invigorating. It's a single page, an unconfirmed report the FBI never even followed up on. The file in question? It's a memo dated back to March of 1950, authored by one Guy Hotel, who served as the director of the FBI field office in Washington, D.C., addressed to FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover. In the memo, Hotel was relaying a story seen by an Air Force pilot about something bizarre they had seen in New Mexico, right around the time of Roswell fever. The memo describes flying saucers, circular in shape with raised centers, approximately 50 feet in diameter. It goes on to say that inside each saucer was a flight crew, each occupied by 3 bodies of roughly human shape, but only 3 feet tall, and bandaged in a manner similar to the blackout suits used by speed flyers and test pilots. The memo goes on to claim that the crafts were found because an aircraft radar had interfered with the controlling mechanisms of the saucer, and concludes by saying, no further evaluation was ever attempted. It seems like it should be a significantly bigger deal than that, no? No further evaluation? That's fine. Someone in the Air Force claims that they saw a series of flying saucers, piloted by tiny men in shiny spacesuits not even 3 years after the Roswell incident, set New Mexico news stations ablaze. But hey, it's probably nothing. At least there's some comfort in knowing that the government has always behaved like this when it comes to investigating and reporting on possible UAP and UFO sightings. Now, admittedly, there's no footage or photography of the incident to speak of, and it's a bit more government-approved hearsay. Whatever was seen on that day could have been something huge, or it could have been bogus. I suppose we'll never know, but it is worth mentioning that Project Blue Book was launched not even 2 years later, investigating UFO sightings in the Air Force, so that's all I'm gonna say on the subject.
Number 2, the Ryan Graves Report. Lieutenant Ryan Graves is a studied Air Force pilot. If you're a super big UFO enthusiast, you might even recognize the name. He's an FA-18 Super Hornet pilot who has flown the skies for 10 years and has seen countless UFOs in his time flying for the Navy, seeing all manner of things he couldn't explain. He spoke out saying, "These things would be out here all day. Keeping an aircraft in the air requires a significant amount of energy with the speeds we observed, and 12 hours in the air is about 11 hours longer than we'd expect." Now, one particular incident occurred in late 2014, when a Super Hornet pilot nearly crashed into one of these objects alongside Graves. Some of these objects were caught on plane camera, and we have got some of that footage for you here today. The pilot and his wingman were flying in tandem about 100 feet apart over the Atlantic East when something flew between them. Graves said that the object looked like a sphere encasing a cube, you know, regular shape a plane would be. The pilots were concerned because were these things a covert drone program or something suspicious and secretive, government officials would have at least warned them, since they had fighter jets flying around for fear of collision. This was the reason the Navy was concerned that perhaps there was more to investigate with this particular encounter of unexplained aerial phenomenon. What was truly unsettling the pilots, besides the fact that there was almost a huge safety crash error there, some of that's words, right? And that was that these crafts were accelerating to hypersonic speeds, and then they would stop and turn on a dime, which is not really something the human pilots are capable of, even our best and brightest, Sorry Goose and Maverick. So what did the pilots think they were dealing with? Graves spoke out, saying, "We have helicopters that can hover. We have aircraft that can fly at 30,000 feet and right at the surface, but combine all of that into one vehicle of some type with no jet engine, no exhaust plume. So what do we think, my goblins and my ghouls? This does definitely seem like something worth digging into, doesn't it? Definitely seems suspicious, to say the least."
Finally, in first place, we have the 2004 series of spottings. On November 14th of 2004, Lieutenant Alex Dietrich was piloting her FA-18 Super Hornet when she observed an oblong object hovering over the water. It leapt into motion, skimming 500 to 1,000 feet over the waves at around 500 knots, and for those of us Canadian civilians, that's around 925 kilometers per hour. The fighter jet's onboard radar couldn't detect the object, but Alex's weapons system operator in the rear seat, who, her name's not public, witnessed it as well. Dietrich has quoted her recollection as, "We were trying to call out what we are seeing to each other and to make sure everybody else is seeing it. It's moving so erratically and so fast fast that our voices, our minds, and then our radio calls can't keep up with it. The majority of credible modern-day UFO sightings can be credited to those that work in the Air Force, and it should be noted that military pilots are trained at what they call REAS, short for reconnaissance, and referring more specifically in this case to the art of recognizing aircraft by their shapes, paint schemes, unit insignia, and more. On one of the other Super Hornets that launched behind Alex was Lieutenant Commander Chad Underwood, who was able to capture the object on an infrared camera. It was 40 feet long, round and smooth, and quickly received the nickname Tic Tac. Now, I'll let the footage that the US government has confirmed as authentic and unexplained speak for itself, since I know we have the clip handy. Around this time, starting on November 10th to be exact, Gary Voorhees, a petty officer on the USS Princeton guided missile cruiser, had been reporting apparitions on his radar screens in the same area, triple checking his equipment before he made his report, and being the main technician responsible for the equipment, along with having 6 years of Navy experience at the time. Voorhees described what he was seeing as impossible. In just seconds, an object had dropped to the waterline from 60,000 feet, hovered, and then zipped away at high velocity, making right-angle turns that were quoted as being confounding and defying gravity. Calm down, Wicked fans, I know what I said. The objects returned for the next week, with Voorhees quoted as saying, "I was able to see it on the horizon during the night and during the day, and it was definitely a glowing object. Could I tell you for 100% certainty what it was we were tracking? No." Now, footage of this event used to exist, with Gary being able to vividly describe his memories, but has since been completely scrubbed from the internet. Now, where have I heard that before? In 5th place, we have the Roswell cover-up. Yes, I know I often reference Roswell when I talk about aliens and UFOs, but so much can be credited back to that historic summer. Retired NSA specialist William Sells of Noblesville, Indiana, claims that his uncle, Wayne Shell, had been a personal bodyguard to President Harry Truman back in 1947. The two men went to Roswell at the insistence of President of the United States Truman in July after sneaking out of the White House disguised as press. Wayne said they met Major Easley at the crash site. Major Easley promised the president that none of the bodies from the crash would remain. The Secret Service instituted Operation Doppelganger and provided Harry Truman's double to make sure the press was unaware of Harry's real location. At first, William didn't believe his uncle, exactly, how any rational person would react, until the family opened his military footlocker in his bedroom after his passing around 1969. Inside were letters from FDR and Truman, along with glossy photos of the Yalta Conference with Churchill, Stalin, and FDR. So, where did all the bodies go? That's what I would like to know. In 4th place, we have a gray alien abduction. Grant Rollins, a resident of suburban Maryland, describes himself as a fairly normal bachelor, living in peace until this all went down in December of 2017. He woke up at 1:30 a.m. to the sound of a break-in and went to the bedroom door to confront the intruder, but was suddenly rendered unconscious as he touched the doorknob. Okay, so someone brave. I would have been cowering under the blankets or like in my closet. He woke up naked and cold in a pill-shaped glass container. The lid was open, so he was able to stumble out onto the floor that was near the container. He described feeling sluggish and barely able to walk, but he thought he'd been kidnapped, so he was urgently trying to find an escape route. The room he was in was made of mostly concrete and plastic with fluorescent lights. He managed to limp into a hallway that was tunnel-shaped and followed a blue glow coming from down the hall. As he walked, he came out of the tunnel and entered a large cylindrical room lined with vehicles on hooks along the walls. They were human vehicles, mostly Japanese and German cars and motorcycles, but some vehicles were clearly from the American military. That's one way to store a collection. In the center of the room was what looked like a metal tree that was 6 stories tall with glowing blue leaves. As Grant stumbled closer, he realized this tree was a large metal cylinder and the leaves were capsules similar to the one he'd woken up in, except these still had people inside of them and were radiating a neon blue glow. As he paid more attention to higher up in this tree, Grant noticed some blue wires moving around in the dark area towards the ceiling. These clumps of wires suddenly floated down towards him and turned to reveal that they had faces in them, each with 2 large dark eyes and narrow slits for noses and mouth. He's compared them in appearance to the typical gray alien face from popular media, with 2 of the faces frowning and 1 smiling. There was an exchange of words and charades between himself and the smiling one for roughly 10 minutes, but he was so exhausted and they were so advanced that no important information was shared between them. Too bad. He passed out once again, waking up later face down in a puddle of his own drool on a glass floor. Gross. He was too tired to get up and was barely able to tilt his head up just enough to take a look around. The room was apparently circular, about 150 square feet in size, and a bright, sterile white color. One of the tentacled creatures was in the room, but was busy facing away and operating a set of strange controls with no buttons or levers. Out of exhaustion, Grant's head fell back down, and through the glass floor saw that they had risen out of a deep black hole that was dug into a grassy field, where a rock-shaped lid closed around the hole to cover it. This is when he realized he was in a spacecraft, and had actually been in a silo of some sort that's here on Earth. Grant passed out for the last time, and was awoken by the sensation of being dropped onto his bed with a hard thud. He checked his phone for the time and saw that it was 6:30 in the morning. Later that day, he found an object that had been inserted and cauterized into his right leg, and experienced a run-in with some men in black suits within 4 days of the abduction. Grant claims that he never believed in abductions or UFOs or men in black, any of that. But now he doesn't have a choice in the matter and is annoyed that there's no official place to get legitimate information or help on the subject. I'm hoping that after talking about this, I don't see any men in black on my way home today. In third place, we have the tales of Edgar Mitchell. Edgar was an Apollo astronaut who passed away in 2018 at the age of 85, and he had many theories about aliens that he often shared with the public. He believed aliens are real and UFOs from extraterrestrials have visited us before, publicly stating that he thought there was a cover-up involving aliens and their visits to Earth. As the sixth man to walk on the moon and a NASA astronaut, his theories and beliefs were among the most credible of UFO believers. Not only was Edgar an astronaut, but he was also a test pilot for the Navy, had an MS in aeronautical engineering, and was awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom in 1970. Take that for credibility. Part of his belief in alien life stemmed from experience he had returning to Earth from the moon, where he felt more connected with the universe than he had ever been before. Edgar has said publicly that he's 90% sure that many of the unidentified flying objects recorded since the 1940s belong to aliens from other planets. When he started speaking out in the 1990s, he said he was only then coming out with his knowledge because he didn't want to be labeled a UFO crank, and stood by his beliefs no matter how much he was criticized. And honestly, that's pretty credible, seeing as anyone who spoke before that, especially to do with Roswell, not a good reputation. In an interview in 1996, Edgar said that there were alien bodies at Roswell, but the government covered it up. In 1998, he called on Washington, D.C. to acknowledge publicly what it knew about alien life. He said he had witnesses he knew personally from intelligence agencies and the military who convinced him that the US government had been covering up UFOs for 50 years, including evidence from Roswell. In 2008, he was interviewed and spoke about how the Roswell crash was real and aliens had contacted humans multiple times. Interestingly enough, Edgar's beliefs were in line with those of Philip James Corso, who was chief of U.S. counterintelligence corporations in Rome in the 1940s and chief of the Pentagon's Foreign Technology Desk in the 1960s. He even wrote a book, The Day After Roswell, where he said that he moved alien artifacts from the Roswell crash, which were later reverse engineered to develop some of our more advanced technology. In an interview in 1996, Edgar said he had met with officials from 3 other countries who had personal encounters with aliens from other planets, not just secondhand information. The evidence of alien contact was strong and classified, including that extraterrestrials were giving technology to the US government. Hi, Canadian here. Can we get some of that too? In 2004, Edgar said that the government was studying alien bodies, but stopped sharing that information with presidents after John F. Kennedy. During a radio interview, he said that aliens were far more advanced than us, and we would have been gone a long time ago if they were hostile. Well, a witness doesn't really get much more credible than Edgar. In second place, we have a Canadian sighting. A former astronaut who would like to remain anonymous was glancing outdoors one day at the unfinished sunroom attached to his bedroom, which he described as having windows that were about 3 to 4 feet off the ground, wrapped around the room, providing a good view of the backyard of the home. Exactly what you want in a sunroom, honestly. He saw the bust of what people described as a mantid, describing it as a confusing sight, similar to an action figure. This being had a large muscular body with a head that was insect-like, with eyes that wrapped around its head, and its face ended in a point similar to that of a beak. The view he had was of its head slightly turned with the body facing him. The eyes were rounded near the front of the face and wrapped to the back and ended in a sharp point, protruding slightly, but not like a mantis, and were very black, similar to Vanta Black. The alien was around 5 feet in height, so not, super tall, so shorter than me. The suit he was wearing was black and shiny, with an indented texture, almost plastic looking, with a large round collar. The body looked approximately human, but the musculature was more rounded and not as defined, making it look more exaggerated and like a toy or a muscle suit. The head was dark with some orange tint on it near the back and a greenish tint near the beak. After a few seconds of eye contact, the window burst outwards and our narrator looked away for a split second, during which the entity disappeared. That same summer, most of those windows in that sunroom slowly burst, which is also really weird. As time went on, he became obsessed and terrified of gray aliens, describing symptoms of extreme pareidolia, seeing big black eyes in almost everything and feeling terrified. In first place, we have a communion alien. Former space traveler Kevin Daniels grew up by the woods and at the age of around 6 years old had a terrifying experience. One afternoon, while playing in his backyard with his brother, he began hearing a very hard knocking sound coming from the side of the house. He looked at the house and saw nothing, and his brother continued playing. The sound hit the house again, and once again he looked and saw, nothing. This horrendous sound hit the house for a third time, but this time Kevin felt the instinct to turn his head to the left, facing the garage by the woods. This is when he spotted a gray creature standing partly behind a tree right in front of the garage. He's described it as having an upside-down onion head with large slanted eyes, a small mouth, and nose. It then telepathically communicated directly into Kevin's head, but in a demonic-sounding voice. His brother noticed something was wrong with him and asked Kevin, what was wrong, but Kevin couldn't speak. He couldn't even get his legs to move, describing the fear like nothing he had ever experienced in his life. The alien began laughing demonically in his head, and he described it as deafening. When Kevin was finally able to scream and partially run, almost falling, he ran for the front door of the house, encountering his mother, who came running, obviously concerned, asking what was wrong. Kevin was crying hysterically and screaming, realizing that whatever this thing was, it was pure evil. His parents tried asking his brother what had happened, but the brother had no idea. Kevin described to his parents what he had seen and what had happened and begged them not to look, but the parents decided to, rightfully go out and investigate the tree in the garage area, finding nothing. Many years later, Kevin came across a book that had the exact picture of the gray alien on it, called Communion. After looking through the contents of the book, he knew then that others had seen the same creature he had, and that it was real, and not just a figment of his imagination, or heat stroke, or anything like that.
Number 5, the Pascagoula abduction. Our first abduction story for you today is going to be an incident known as the Pascagoula abduction. It happened in October 11th, 1973, when two friends were fishing on the Pascagoula River in Mississippi, hence the name. Charles Hickson and Calvin Parker claimed that day that they were abducted by aliens and have vivid memories of one of the most compelling alien abduction cases in history. According to Hickson and Parker's stories, they saw a blue light hovering above the riverbank while they were fishing. They decided to approach it. I guess I personally would not have. They claimed that they saw 3 short, gray, humanoid bipedal entities with gray, wrinkled, mottled skin and crab-like appendages. Sounds like those crab bad guys from Fallout 3, if anyone knows what I'm talking about. The beings levitated Hickson and Parker into their craft, where they were subjected to a quick extraterrestrial checkup, for lack of a better word. I bet being levitated was probably kind of fun once you get over the sheer cosmic horror that would come with being abducted. Hickson claims that his alien checkup lasted only about 20 minutes and mostly involved the gray crab alien sticking a probe right up his nose. Hickson and Parker were released back down to Earth, allegedly with all of their memories of the incident intact, which is a bit of a rarity in alien abduction cases, and swiftly reported it to the authorities, and an investigation was launched. The case quickly garnered national attention. Air Force even got involved. Now, a good dose of skepticism should always be present when talking about any alien abduction story. I think that's reasonable. You shouldn't just believe them sight unseen. It's kind of a wild thing to claim, in all fairness. It's good to keep an open mind of what could be true and what could be out of this world. And if you're looking for way more out of this world stories, we have got so many videos on aliens and flying saucers and all sorts of weird things up in the night sky. If aliens aren't your jam at all, that's totally fine. I respect it. We got cryptids, we got horror movies, we got true crime, we got just about anything freaky you can think up. So hit that subscribe button, hit the bell if you wouldn't mind. But do me a favor, would you kindly do that at the end of this video? Because I got way more alien abduction stories coming up for you right now. Number 4, Kelly Cahill. Our next abduction story comes to us from the land down under and involves a woman who was brought aboard an alien ship down under up above. Her name is Kelly Cahill, and in 1993, her story shocked Australia, which is not easy to do. They're not an easily shockable nation. According to Cahill, she and her husband were driving home from a friend's house in the early hours of the morning when they saw a strange object hovering in the sky. As they approached it, the object suddenly descended and landed in front of their car, blocking their path. Cahill claimed that the craft was a triangular-shaped UFO and was larger than her car. Cahill and her husband then experienced a period they would describe as missing time, unaware, as if there was a hole in their memories. They would later recall that they were being taken aboard the craft and experimented on by strange beings which they described as being tall and thin, with bluish gray skin and large black almond-shaped eyes. She claimed that they were communicating with her telepathically, and that she was able to understand them despite not knowing their language, meaning she got to follow along with the horrors of what's happening. The big problem I think we have with being abducted by aliens, first and foremost, is the language barrier. Wouldn't be scary at all if I knew what tissues they were collecting and what parts of me they were cutting open. I think I'd be totally cool as a cucumber. Cahill reported seeing other humans in the craft alongside her in a state of intense duress, probably because they didn't understand the aliens. Should have been translated. She said that eventually the beings, once they were finished with her, peacefully released her and her husband back home, where her story became the subject of a TV documentary and an international attention. Do you believe her? Did she really get abducted by aliens that night? Number 3, the Betty and Barney Hill incident. It's sad how many people see a UFO and no one else in the entire world will believe them. You know, not their friends, not their family. That's why this case is different. A young married couple claims that not only they saw a UFO together, but they were abducted together. That's one for the memory books. You know, they say the couple that probes together stays together. It's a fairly well documented case. It even served as the inspiration behind the alien abduction story in American Horror Story Asylum. And how about Evan Peters, huh? Love that guy. Anyway, the real story revolved around Barney and Betty Hill in 1961. The two of them were driving home through New Hampshire when they both saw a blinding bright light flying above them in the sky. Betty started to feel dizzy, and the two of them soon found themselves asleep on the road. A moment passed, and they found themselves parked in their driveway 2 full hours later, not remembering a second of what had happened. The couple claimed that they had traveled to a star system 39 light years away called Zeta Reticuli. The two had connections and were able to get in contact with Air Force officials to report their strange sighting, and would spend the next few years trying to explain their case to anyone who would listen in the desperate hopes of getting some help and some answers. Barney would meet with a psychiatrist regularly who he told that he kept having nightmares where he was being operated on by small gray-skinned, slanted-eyed creatures that would take samples of his skin, his fingernails, his flesh to do with he did not know. So the psychiatrist had him undergo hypnosis therapy, his wife as well, hoping perhaps that something repressed could be unearthed, and maybe they should have left it alone, because what they found was terrifying. When going under hypnosis and waking back up, Betty was able to draw a scientifically accurate map of the star system from memory, creating a map that was nearly spot on to the real Zeta Reticuli. This incident inspired the Air Force to launch Project Blue Book to collect more stories of UFO abductions like this. Number 2, Kenneth Arnold. If you've ever wondered why flying saucers became the default term for UFOs as opposed to something like flying cigars or flying triangles, it has a very large part to do with this next story, which was one of the first big mainstream sightings of a UFO in 1947. Now, interestingly, possibly coincidentally, possibly not, this incident occurred only a few weeks before the infamous Roswell, New Mexico incident. So UFO fever was just on the brain around 1947. This happened to Kenneth Arnold, a clean-cut all-American aviator. He was flying a small private plane over Washington around Mount Rainier on a scavenger hunt of sorts for the wreckage of a downed plane, which had a fairly significant reward offered by the Army for its salvage, which Kenneth was after, of course. While he was prospecting, Arnold claims to have seen 9 blinding bright flashes of light, flying in a bizarre pattern like the tail of a kite. Described as saucers moving at an incredible speed, Arnold tried to do his level best to assess what these things were from the seat of his aircraft, working out how fast they were moving, taking his watch and clocking from when they reached the peak of the mountain. He worked out that they were going about 1,700 miles per hour, which is pretty darn fast considering in 1947 humans had just broken the sound barrier at 700 miles per hour, and that was an unbelievable leap in technology. Whatever it was Kenneth saw, it was something far more advanced than anything he'd ever seen on Earth. When he'd landed, he told the crew at the airport about everything that he'd seen, suggesting that he'd seen missiles or maybe some experimental new tech. For weeks after, Arnold would become a media darling, being interviewed by several reporters, all hoping to get the big scoop on this. Part of what made this such a defining UFO story for the American people was how earnest Arnold was about his story. He was an honest man who provided straightforward facts, experience with aviation, a mathematical and rational approach to all of this, and very little in the way of wild speculation. which is a shame, because I love wild speculation. Let's do a little more wild speculating with our last point. Number 1, the Betty Cash incident. In December 29, 1980, Betty Cash would see something on the outskirts of Houston near Dayton that would change the course of her life forever. She was driving with her friend, Vicki Landrum, and Landrum's grandson. At around 9 p.m., the three of them noticed a blinding bright light in the sky. Landrum believed it to be the second coming of Jesus, whereas Betty Cash described it like this: "We didn't know what it was, but we knew that it was something lighting up the sky. We all began to feel this heat, and all of a sudden Vicky screamed for me to stop. And when I stopped, she went forward, and her handprint was embedded into the dashboard of the car. And I thought, well, I've got to see what this is. So I got out, I walked towards the front of the car, and I stood there looking up to try and figure out what this object was, and then a diamond-shaped object appeared with flames shooting out. The heat was tremendous. When I reached for the door handle, it was so hot I couldn't even begin to open it. The only thing I was thinking while all this was happening was, are we gonna make it out of this alive?" Landrum stated that moments later, a large squadron of black helicopters took over the sky above the area. After the choppers cleared, Betty took the Landrums home and retired for the night. The next morning, Miss Cash said she was extremely sick, suffering from nausea, vomiting, diarrhea, weakness, an intense burning in her eyes. Now, bizarrely, Landrum and her grandson all reported the same symptoms. These symptoms would worsen pretty seriously, with large blisters forming on the skin, and eventually Betty Cash had to be taken to a hospital where she was suffering from cancer symptoms, where she lost large patches of skin and clumps of hair. Now, to date, there has never been a conclusive answer to what happened to Cash and Landrum. What caused the radiation sickness? Was it the military testing new technology? Was it a craft from another world?
In 5th place today, we have the footage the Pentagon refuses to release from Alaska. Between the dates of February 4th to the 12th of 2023, 4 different unidentified objects were shot down over Alaska, South Carolina, the Yukon, and the Great Lakes. While cockpit audio from F-16 pilots who shot down the UFOs over Lake Huron was released, a spokesman for the Pentagon has confirmed that the footage will not be released in the near future, being quoted directly saying, "I can tell you that there is not currently any images or video footage that we can release. The imagery remains classified, and I have not received any information as to the potential timeline on a change in classification." This refusal is a drastic difference in comparison to the quick release of an Air Force photo of what is believed to have been a Chinese spy balloon that was shot down at the same time over on the East Coast, and footage from when a Russian plane appeared to intentionally collide with a drone last March. Noted UFO researcher John Greenwald requested the footage and photos of the UFO shootdowns be released via a Freedom of Information Act request, with the Pentagon claiming national security exemptions to deny this request. An Air Force official said that the images would reveal cryptology and national security concerns if released. And even the Canadian RCMP are playing coy, having ended their public search for the remains. Now, I don't know about y'all, but that sounds pretty dang suspicious to me. Hey, anyone want to take a random trip to the Yukon just to sightsee? Totally not to recover UFO debris or anything suspicious.
Number 4, the observatory. In 2007, astronomer Alberto Meyer, living in Busta Arezizo, Italy, and I butchered that pronunciation, made an incredible discovery, almost completely by accident, which is where most scientific progress gets made. He was adjusting the focus of his telescope when he spotted and tracked a UFO as it flew across the surface of the moon. Now, the video shows the portions of the moon that he was focused on in close-up mode while tracking a solid black object as it flew over the surface of the moon. And look, I could just describe what is going on in this video, but I could also let you get your peepers on it and let you decide for yourself. They say a picture is worth 1,000 words, so here's roughly 24,000 words worth of context. Take yourself a look. Pretty weird, huh? That round black object is tracked as he catches just after it passing the Wallace crater, and yeah, this is how I'm learning that parts of the moon were named. I didn't know there was moon geography. It hovers and hesitates before making a sudden change of path at an exact 45-degree angle. Take your protractor out. The precision and control is what's giving people pause, you know? It seems to move as if it's being controlled, and with such mechanical dominance that it seems like it has to be something that's being intentionally driven, and not just a strange rock floating through the stars, or, I'm gonna be honest, a bug crawling on the lens, which is what I thought it might be. Now, commenters on the video, because this thing went viral when it got posted, pointed out that the object does not decrease in size at all, suggesting that the object isn't close to the moon, and rules out the theory that this is a shadow on the surface of the moon from a large object over Earth. I'm only capable of so much, I'm gonna be honest. The science stuff, that's kind of above my pay grade. But I can confirm and offer my speculation on when videos of UFOs look weird, and that's exactly what's going on here. So is this a UFO? Who is to say?
Number 3. Alien Dance Party. Next, we have a rather strange tale from a man who claims that when he was young, he was transported to a pavilion filled with aliens who were having an intergalactic sock hop. Is this truth or madness? I'll let you be the judge. When I was young, I had some very strange experiences which affected my entire life. This was in the 1930s. In 1935, I had pneumonia, which in those days was a dangerous and sometimes fatal disease. One evening, right at the dark, 2 beings came to the window in an elongated envelope. They and their conveyance were like the Northern Lights. They asked me to go with them, and each took a hand. When they touched me, it was like being lightly tickled. Very pleasurable. The odd part was that you could see through them, but they were there, and we talked without sound. They took me to a huge pavilion where couples were dancing. My impression was that the males were dressed in black and white trim. The females were dressed the opposite way. There was no ceiling, but crystals hung above and made music beyond comparison that sounded to me like wind chimes. I had 3 visits to this place in all. On the last visit, a female asked me why I was afraid of the dark. She said to me that both the light and the dark are my benefactors, and they would make them equal. She took a crystal and placed it in the palm of my left hand. For a moment, it resembled the Star of David, 2 triangles. Then it melted and ran between my fingers. After that, my night vision changed. My eyes would adjust quickly so that I could see even when it was pitch black. I recovered quickly from my illness. A few months later, on a camping trip, I found I was the only one awake late at night, watching undulating shafts of bright light. The shafts of light began a strange, seemingly patterned movement. I was trying to puzzle this out when suddenly there appeared my transparent envelope in what looked like an oval cylinder. It just seemed correct to get in. In an instant, I was inside the pavilion again, but the beings were not dancing as before. They seemed to be conversing silently, but not with me. A female asked me to step up on the dais, because I was their conductor. Number 2. The Secrets of the Universe Revealed. This next story features a man who made the acquaintance of an alien race who taught him about the building blocks of our very universe, which was pretty cool of them. This is his story. I am a graphic designer with a good visual memory. What I saw was visually very vivid, but it doesn't make much sense. However, it may have been the most important thing that ever happened to me. In November 1980, my wife and I were driving north of Dundee when suddenly I saw a cerulean blue light pointing at our car from the sky. After that, I have a fragmented memory. We both have a fragmented memory of some bizarre events, but there are a lot of gaps. Basically, we somehow lost about an hour's time. I remember seeing a hairless, tall, man-like being in a blue robe. He was looking at us, inviting us aboard his craft telepathically. His costume struck me as absurd. He was the leader in a blue cape. The cape looked stupid, illogical. He was mentally luring us up to the spacecraft. Somehow, the next thing was, we were on board a ship of some kind, being examined, quite painlessly, by another being wearing a yellow robe with ruffled collar. Also, somehow completely absurd, incongruous. Suddenly, the examination process turned nasty. I felt my mind was being forcibly invaded. I had no control. My brain felt like there was a tunnel that goes through my mind to theirs. Our minds are connected. It could have been a tube or a tunnel of light, gray-brown. It was horrible. It pulled everything out of my head. There was a terrible sound, piercing, high-pitched. My thoughts had turned to goo, but I could see them visually. They had my mind, but I still had it too. Then it seemed as though I was okay again, but I felt completely different mentally. I can't explain this, but there's more to it than anyone knows. There's more to life, more to the world. There's more to everything than anybody knows. More dimensions than things coexisting. There are many more than 3 dimensions. Everywhere, it all works together. Everything coexists. I still can't explain all these thoughts, where they came from, and so on. Number 1. A UFO sighting. To end our compilation, I have selected a story of a UFO sighting. Not really much else to say about it. Let's dive in. My name is John Healy. At the time of making this officially transcribed statement, I was a detective with the Cleveland Police Department. I was also a U.S. Army reservist, training as a flight medic. The incident occurred when I was traveling on a helicopter with 3 other reservists on the evening of October 18th, 1973, about 10:30 p.m. We were halfway between Columbus and Cleveland, near Ashland, when the crew chief saw a red light on the horizon. He asked the pilot if there were any towers around there, and was told there were not. As we went along at an altitude of about 3,000 feet, the light seemed to be growing brighter and brighter. It appeared to be on a collision course with us. It kept coming right at us. The pilot had to put our helicopter into a power dive to avoid it. We were looking right through the windshield, watching this thing, and it damn near came to a stop right over us. It just hovered for a while. We all got a very good look at it. It had a steady red light on its prow. It was cigar-shaped. There were no wings on it. It made no noise, created no air turbulence, shining down out of aft end. It shone down and on us, and you could see a definite cone shape, the shape of the green light beam. I've seen aircraft from PTI-9s up to C-5As, so I know an aircraft when I see one at night. But this thing scared the living hell right out of me. We contacted Mansfield Airport and told them we were almost in a collision with an unidentified flying object, operating at 3,000 feet and 600 knots. Mansfield never acknowledged our broadcast. We tried to get a hold of Cleveland Airport and we couldn't until the object passed over us. It continued to the west, picked up speed, and we lost it over the horizon. We never saw it again. We talked about this sighting all the way back and we just couldn't dope it out. The thing didn't have wings, but at 3,000 feet, you have to have wings to stay aloft. It couldn't have been a dirigible or a Zeppelin because those things don't move at the speed this thing moved. Clandestine aircraft wouldn't operate at that speed at that low an altitude. All four of us filed official reports.
In 5th place, we have Skinny Bob. Yes, I'm aware this is a controversial series of videos, but I truly believe that there's enough to believe to prove the validity of the clips. A very curious video showed up on YouTube in 2011, showing a collection of leaked videos that allegedly shows an alien being interrogated by some sort of government agency, possibly the KGB. If I go missing tomorrow, y'all know why now. An alien that looks like a typical gray-type entity is shown being interviewed and examined, supposedly as part of some sort of diplomatic exchange. The creature is described as being from the Zeta Reticuli, star system, sent as part of an envoy to discuss matters of mutual concern. According to the videos, the aliens would be escorted by special officers and only meet with high-ranking officials. Pretty formal. Although several aliens are claimed to have been present, the one most prominently featured has been given the nickname Skinny Bob. The alien appears as a very thin, slouched-over figure with an oversized bald head, slit-like mouth, large eyes that seem expressive and blank, and claw-like hands. There was apparently a whole series of interviews conducted with the creature between 1942 and 1969, although only a few clips have managed to get leaked out. The most well-known clip simply shows Skinny Bob sitting at a table, apparently in a telepathic interview, after which we see footage of the alien from head to toe, showing its disproportionately long arms and overall build. After that, there is a shot of it within a pool of some sort of liquid where it would supposedly sleep. I guess that's where we got the idea for a waterbed. According to the videos, the aliens were often filmed without their knowledge or agreement, with document 072/E supposedly describing an incident in 1961 where 3 of the beings realized they were being secretly filmed by a hidden device, which was considered a violation of their agreement. Now, I don't know about you, but I wouldn't want to cross an alien. There was a treaty that stipulated that photographs and filming of the entities would not be allowed unless specific permission was given. While these 2 clips are the most well-known and widely available, there were allegedly other clips that have since been taken down, such as that of the alien spacecraft and another of an autopsy being performed on a dead specimen at the base. Look, I will admit there have been many assumptions that this footage was faked, but let's review the evidence here. The budget to pull off this sort of high-quality costuming and filming would have been over like $250,000 alone, and no one's claimed responsibility or tried to monetize the footage in any way. Now, this was in 2011 and now it's 2023. It's been a minute. If this was like a tie-in to a horror movie, somebody would have claimed it by now. Many CGI experts and those in the movie industry have studied the footage, and most agree that if it is a fake, it is the work of a studio with a big budget. And as somebody who has worked on big budget movies, no studio is wasting that kind of cash for a hoax. In 4th place, we have a glimmery alien from Florida. Oh, before I forget, from this point on, all stories are from the mouths of former astronauts, who happen to be some of the most credible witnesses of UFOs and alien life out there. They're literally trained in spacecraft identification and screened for mental stability and vision perfection. Take that, skeptics. In October of 2014, former space traveler Adam Maloney was walking his dog in the Pembroke Pines, Florida neighborhood, and came around a curve in the sidewalk and, street. He noticed something unusual and stopped walking, staring at it, trying to figure out exactly what he was seeing. Now, his dog seemed more annoyed that Adam had just stopped. The dog refused to move or bark. I get it. Adam described seeing a figure around 30 feet from his spot in the area between the sidewalk and street. Not facing him, though. It was like skeletal thin, bony, around 6 feet tall, with white or light grayish skin, no hair, and something bluish near the ear. He knew immediately it wasn't human when the creature sensed Adam staring, looked over its right shoulder, directly at him, and then looked down at the puppy. Then it suddenly started to run, into the middle of the street and then down the next street into the next block. Its knees were apparently backwards, which I'm trying to picture right now, and that is so weird. As it ran, it began to gradually fade, like the edges were only part of what Adam could see. It was glimmering and fading until he just couldn't see it anymore. He never saw it again, but I wonder.
Number 3, Gary McKinnon. Now, I've talked a bit about Gary McKinnon before on this channel because I am obsessed with this story. He's a notorious hacker who broke into NASA's security. His story is a cool one. I love anytime you hear someone pulling a fast one over a government agency like this, so it bears repeating. He's a genius computer hacker with a lot of spare time and wanted to know just what the Yanks were hiding from his home in Scotland. He wanted to go after NASA's data server to see if they had anything hidden they'd never told anybody about. Been called the biggest military hack of all time, so I'd wager maybe he found something. Why risk your life, career, freedom on this exactly? McKinnon claims he had received an insider tip that the US had reverse engineered technology from UFOs, free energy. In his own words, he said, "This should not be kept hidden from the public when pensioners can't even pay their fuel bills. And it's just like a bonus if you get some alien stuff on the side." So what did he find? McKinnon claims in his searching he saw images of aircraft that did not resemble any he had ever seen in his life. One in particular he describes as looking like a massive cigar-shaped craft floating over the northern hemisphere that did not look man-made. He said he was in shock looking at the image and didn't think to take a photo. Well, there's those cylindrical shaped crafts again. I told you to keep thinking about them, and keep thinking about them again because they're going to show up one more time before this video is done. Well, that wasn't the only exciting thing he found. He also found something called the Disclosure Project, a 400-page document outlining testimonials from government agents across multiple branches of service recording sightings of unidentified objects, but that wasn't even the meal ticket. The real jewel was a document of a non-terrestrial officer's sheet. A spreadsheet listing the name of NASA agents to be transferred to new ships or serve on board space stations, but McKinnon noted that none of the names of the vessels existed in any database. Now, I don't know how much you know about the US government, but they absolutely love it when you poke holes in their important security, triply so if you do it from the comfort of your bedroom in a country away. The US tried their level best to extradite McKinnon, but were prevented by the Crown from serving out a 70-year sentence. McKinnon is doing well. He recently took to the UFO subreddit to answer questions from fans and true believers. There wasn't a whole lot of new information, but it's just nice to know he hasn't been shoved into a black van somewhere. Number 2, the Navy and their pilots, Navy pilots. In September 2019, Navy spokesperson Joe Gradisher spoke out on 3 recently released videos by the Army that contained evidence of unexplained aerial phenomena. The Navy agreed that just this once, they would be willing to talk about something weird they'd seen and recorded because pilots are reportedly encountering bizarre things every day and feel just too uncomfortable to report it. One pilot in particular, Ryan Graves, who's a 10-year vet, has said he believes he's seen thousands of unexplained phenomena in the air in his career, but these go unreported because of the stigma attached to the previous theories about what may or may not be in the videos, in his words. To translate that a bit in layman's terms, the Navy feels that they have to comment so that pilots are willing to talk about that, hey, maybe we're seeing UFOs without feeling too crazy. These videos in question were released from 2017 to 2018, and they feature long, oblong-shaped objects captured with infrared that disappear in the Earth's atmosphere. Hey, there it is again, more cylindrical-shaped UFOs. Now, I'll be clear, I don't really have much of a connection or through line here, but I do think it's very fascinating how many of these stories do mention these cylindrical-shaped objects. Far from the earliest or last, in 2004 and in 2015, 2 similar sightings were reported featuring similar vehicles. Now, the purpose of investigating most of these reports is more focused on safety hazards and threats of national security. And at the same time, maybe they're not openly admitting they've got UFOs flying around, but they're getting pretty darn close. The 2004 sighting, I think, is a particularly fascinating one. 2 pilots, one Commander Fravor and one Lieutenant Commander Slate, called it in, reporting that they saw objects out of nowhere at some 80,000 feet in the air, and then descending rapidly towards the Pacific Ocean, stopping at around 20,000 feet and hovering in place. They would drop out of radar range or shoot directly up in the sky on a 90-degree angle. You know, normal things aircraft crafts love to do. They weren't American crafts, and they weren't recognized by any organizations they'd ever seen. Maybe it's tech not of this world. Number 1, government councils. You know, the era we're in right now is probably one of the most fascinating times to be invested in UFOs and unexplained alien sightings, so consider yourself lucky. Because it seems like we are getting dangerously close to a government finally confessing it. It feels like we're weeks away some days, you know? The UAP report was a seminal turning point when the Pentagon outright admitted they had thousands of documents and reports and investigations into the possibility of life somewhere out there in the Milky Way. Over the years, there have been a few investigations into unexplained aerial phenomena, but they're usually pretty hush-hush clandestine. Project Blue Book is probably the most famous secret project among them, but that was, you know, a secret. Well, in the interest of transparency, as of October 2022, NASA is coming clean, washing their hands, and opening a new study into the research of extraterrestrial life. 16 hand-picked scientists and specialists have been selected to analyze data and determine how best to go forward when observing events. And they're not really looking at past cases, they're more looking towards future things. And this project will include researchers, personnel from all divisions, including former astronaut Scott Kelly, who served as the pilot for the Discovery shuttle and also held the world record for most days in space. So I guess he probably knows 1 or 2 things about space, maybe, and I'm sure he's seen something weird. Kelly himself doesn't personally believe in aliens, saying, "I think there's probably intelligent life in the universe, but I don't think they visit planet Earth." Why not? We got lots of great stuff out here. We got water slides, we got Vin Diesel. No other planet has those 2 things, and I'm sure we got a couple other great things from the human experience, so aliens, come on down when you're ready. We'll welcome you with open arms, and if those were UFOs you sent, we're really sorry that we shot those down. I didn't have anything to do with that. Number 5, the Phoenix Lights. If you ask most people what the most famous UFO sighting in the world was, they might say the Roswell, New Mexico incident. It's definitely the most referenced in pop culture. There's a CW TV show about it that's had like 10 seasons. Roswell is almost synonymous with the concept of flying saucers. But the most documented UFO sighting occurred in 1997 in Phoenix, Arizona, when a series of bright lights in the sky were seen together by hundreds of people. Okay? This isn't just some passing dot, this was something hundreds of people corroborated on. Now, like any good UFO sighting, there's no real concrete answer as to what happened, and only speculation to go on. So let's run through the facts. It was on March 13, 1997. Hundreds of people around Phoenix described seeing these vivid bright lights, around 6 or 7 total. Now, reports claim that these mysterious lights were huge and big enough that they were blocking out your vision of the clouds, the stars, but they wouldn't produce any noise like a jet or a helicopter or anything. Big, blocky, silent. A few hours later on that same night, a second wave of sightings came over the city, describing a long trail of blinking objects that some said was a mile long and boomerang shaped. They were blinking in regular intervals, orange and blue lights. Air traffic controllers reported seeing these lights, but didn't detect any planes on the radar. And the air traffic controllers described this incident as inexplicable. But maybe the strangest part about all this, maybe just to me, is that the first person who called in the sighting was legendary 80s mullet owner and actor Kurt Russell, who was flying into the city with his son. Snake Plissken asked what the strange lights hovering over the city was, leading to Kurt Russell calling it in. The only thing he got back from air traffic control was, "We don't show anything." Now, officially, the military would claim that this was a test for high-intensity flares, but eyewitnesses weren't so convinced. The governor of Arizona at the time, who was a former Air Force officer, claimed that the aircrafts he saw that day didn't resemble anything he had ever seen in his life. So, what happened in Arizona that day? Was it a widespread enough hoax, government cover-up, or proof of life from beyond the stars? You tell me. And if you're looking for more UFO videos, you already know we have got that and then some. Click on through to the channel, we've literally got hundreds of UFO videos. You could be watching them for the rest of the evening. But if UFO stuff ain't your jam, we've got cryptids, conspiracies, true crime, fake crime, pretty much anything you could want. So hit subscribe, hit that little bell, and don't miss a single thing. But do it at the end of this video, would you kindly? We got way more UFO sightings coming up for you. Number 4, Japanese Flight 1268. Our next sighting comes to us out of Japan. well, the skies of Japan. It's a video about flying objects after all. It was in November of 1986 when a pilot on a cargo flight thought that he made a close encounter of the third kind. When Captain Kenju Terauchi and a skeleton crew were flying a cargo delivery of some fancy bougie French wines into Japan, when Captain Terauchi claims he saw shining bright lights surrounding both wings of the plane. Now initially Terauchi said at the time he thought that this was just US flown fighter jets patrolling around the border of the Soviet Union, but when he got a decent look at the craft, he realized these weren't friends of Uncle Sam. He said, "Two spaceships stopped in front of our face, shooting off bright lights." He continued saying, "The inside of the cockpit shined brightly, and I felt warm in the face." These aircraft in particular were described as being cuboid, I guess they're Borg ships, with jet propulsion systems clustered around a dark center. At the same time that these unidentified objects were soaring by the plane, these objects seemed like they were jamming the plane's communications in some way, as Terauchi and the crew couldn't contact ground control at all during the sighting, as if there was some electromagnetic field. The rest of the crew, however, wasn't quite as convinced by this strange encounter, with the co-pilot and flight engineer believing that the objects they saw were not but strange lights, and agreed that they were definitely unexplained and they couldn't find a reasonable possibility for what they were, but that they didn't necessarily think they were flying saucers. A committee looking into the phenomena claims that it was just light refraction through ice crystals suspended in the clouds, but that doesn't quite explain how the cockpit got warm or anything like that, or where the communications were going. So what do you think? Aliens or ice crystals?
The Texas Zoo creature. So we take a look at a lot of UFOs on this channel, so I thought I'd change it up a bit and take a look at a bizarre looking creature instead. This picture was taken just 1 year ago, back in May of 2022. It was taken by a security camera at a zoo in Amarillo, Texas at around 1:30 a.m. A bizarre figure was spotted on a security camera, and before you say it's just a lion on its hind legs, which would also be pretty freaky, mind you, this figure was outside of the zoo, so it's not one of the animals unless one of them escaped. Now, why am I putting this on an alien list? A lot of people think it looks like a werewolf or Sonic the Hedgehog or something, but I don't know. To me, it looks pretty alien. Look at the elongated back part of the head. It almost looks like a xenomorph from Alien or something. Plus, I find the presence of alien life to be far, far more likely than werewolves or other kinds of fantasy-based creatures like that. I mean, like, who knows, but there's a lot of unexplored space out there and a lot of explored space here on Earth. I think we'd have spotted a werewolf by now if they existed. There's also a big chance that this could just be a trick of the camera. Security footage can be kind of janky sometimes, or perhaps we have a zoo prankster on our hands, or maybe this is a super deformed person. If that's the case, I hope they're okay. Regardless though, this is an odd figure to see in the middle of the night outside of a Texas zoo. And trust me, I know my Texas zoos. The Wales UFO. I didn't know this, but it turns out there are a lot of UFO sightings in Wales. I don't know what the aliens' fascination is with Wales, but reports date all the way back to the 1940s. Actually, all the way back to the 12th century, but I don't know if I give much credence to stuff dating back that far. Apparently, religious pilgrims believed to have seen a fire-breathing dragon erupt from the sea and fly into the sky. Could have been a UFO and they just didn't know what to make of it and just called it a dragon, but anyway, way off topic. The UFO in question here was spotted back in September of 2016 by a police helicopter at around 9 p.m. It was only visible on the chopper's thermal camera and seemed to be moving at a speed of 106 miles per hour over the Bristol Channel. Full video of the footage was released by a former cop, Gary Hasseltine, who has been urging the UK government to come forward and reveal what they know about UFOs. What's also interesting about this one is that the object was moving against the wind, so it is or was being operated one way or another. It's not like it was some object caught up in a wind current or something. Police also stated years after the event that it could have possibly been a drone, but they were struggling to keep up with it, so it'd have to be a pretty fast one. There are drones that reach that 100-mile-per-hour speed, but they're pretty high-end. Your common drones clocking at around 45 to 70 miles per hour, so again, who knows, but it's possible. And coming in at our number one spot, we have aliens in Bolivia. I wanted to finish off with this one because we have reports of both your typical UFO sighting and reports of actual aliens being spotted here. So we're getting some real bang for your buck with this one. The story just happened back in March of this year, and it all started when residents of a small village in the La Paz area of Bolivia claimed to have spotted a mysterious